There are stories that do not arrive like wind. They arrive like weight, as if someone had opened a door too ancient and forgotten to close it. It is thus that the figure of Azazel emerges, a name that echoes among forgotten parchments, rabbinic traditions, and texts that the early church decided not to include in the canon. But these writings survived, like embers hidden under millennial ashes, and what they reveal about the days before the flood is too disturbing to be ignored. The primary source regarding Azazel is in the Book of Enoch, a text attributed to Noah's great-grandfather, originally written in Aramaic and Hebrew, dated by scholars between 300 and 100 years before Christ. This book was revered by ancient Jewish communities, cited in the New Testament by the letter of Jude, and preserved in its entirety only by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Fragments of it appeared in the caves of Qumran, among the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947. It was a text that history tried to bury, but which refused to disappear. And at the center of this forgotten narrative is a group of celestial beings called Watchers, angels designated to observe humanity, silent guardians who were supposed only to witness the unfolding of creation. But something broke, something that no celestial decree foresaw. Desire entered where it should not exist. There is something deeply disturbing in realizing that many of the stories that shaped our faith have layers that were never told to us. You know Noah, you know the flood, you know the ark. But how many times has someone explained to you what was really happening on earth for God to decide to destroy almost all of humanity? This biblical depth, these details that transform knowledge into revelation, is exactly what many Christians never access. If you feel that there is something more in the scriptures, something that goes beyond the surface of the stories you have heard since childhood, I have prepared a material that can transform your understanding. It is the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. In it you will discover hidden meanings in the final words of Christ on the cross, prophetic connections that span the entire Bible, revelations that most preachers never mention. To access it right now, it is simple. Look at the screen, a square code is appearing. Take your cell phone, open the camera app, point it at this code. A secure link will appear automatically. Tap that link and you will already be on the book's page. If you prefer, the link is also in the description of this video. On the cell phone, tap the title of the video or the little word "More" that appears just below. On the computer or television, look under the video. The link is there. Thousands of people are already deepening their faith through this reading, and each access also helps to keep this channel active, producing more content like this. So access it now, comment Amen down below, and let us continue this journey together. The Book of Enoch describes that 200 angels descended upon Mount Hermon. The name in Hebrew, Har Hermon, carries a linguistic root that means place of oath or place of destruction, and it was no coincidence. There, on that peak that rises 2,814 meters above sea level, on the border between what is today Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, these beings made a pact, a collective oath. Each committed himself to the rebellion so that none could turn back alone. Imagine the weight of this scene. 200 beings of light created to serve, gathered on a frozen summit deciding to abandon their original nature, not by force, by choice. The text names the leaders. Semjaza was the supreme commander, the one who convinced the others to descend. But among the chiefs of groups of 10, one name stands out with particular force: Azazel. He was not just another rebel. He was the bearer of forbidden knowledge, the one who would teach humanity things it was not prepared to receive. But what exactly did these angels want on earth? Chapter 6 of the Book of Enoch is direct. They saw the daughters of men, found them beautiful, and desired to take them as wives. It was carnal desire. It was physical attraction. It was something that, according to the very angelic nature described in the scriptures, should not exist in them. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 22 that the angels in heaven neither marry nor are given in marriage. But these were no longer in heaven. They had chosen the earth, and with it they chose to live under rules that were not theirs. The union occurred. Angels and human women fathered children, and these children were not normal. The text calls them Nephilim, giants, beings of uncommon stature, described as 300 cubits high in some passages, which would be equivalent to something around 130 meters, taller than the entire Statue of Liberty, including the pedestal. Of course, many scholars interpret these numbers as hyperbolic, symbolic language, but even the most conservative estimates speak of beings 3 to 4 meters in height. Think of a man the size of 2 basketball players stacked together. It was not natural. And it was not just the size, it was the hunger. The Book of Enoch. Chapter 7 describes that the Nephilim began to devour the production of men. When the food ran out, they began to eat the animals themselves. And when the animals were not enough, they turned against the humans. They drank blood. They consumed human flesh. The earth became a slaughterhouse commanded by creatures that should not exist. But the problem was not just the children. It was what the fathers taught. Azazel, in particular, introduced knowledge that transformed human society forever. Chapter 8 of the Book of Enoch lists his contributions: the art of manufacturing swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Before him, human conflicts were primitive, limited, almost accidental. After him, war became a science, technique, an organized strategy of destruction. How much blood was shed throughout history, with weapons descending from these first lessons. But Azazel did not stop at war. He also taught women to manufacture bracelets, ornaments, cosmetics, eye paint, precious stones, and fabric dyes. He introduced vanity as a language and the body as an instrument of power. What seemed like embellishment was in truth manipulation, a form of control that did not need swords, silently lethal. Other angels taught other things. Semjaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, practices associated with sorcery and the manipulation of nature. Amaros taught how to resolve enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the knowledge of the constellations. Tamiel taught the reading of the stars. Asradel taught the movement of the moon. It was a complete curriculum of occult knowledge poured over a humanity that was still crawling in its own history. Imagine a 5-year-old child receiving unrestricted access to all the knowledge of the internet, without a filter, without guidance, without the maturity to process what they see. It was that. Humanity received tools it did not know how to use, powers it could not control. Knowledge it immediately distorted, and the result was chaos. The Book of Enoch, chapter 8, verse 4, summarizes, "And there was much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways." The entire earth was contaminated. It was not just individual sin, it was systemic corruption, structural, genetic even if we consider the Nephilim. Here arises a question that spans centuries of theological debate. Why did God allow this to happen? The texts do not offer a direct answer, but they suggest something important. Free will was not given only to humans. The angels could also choose. And the choice of the watchers was deliberate, conscious, collective. They knew what they were doing. That is why the oath on Mount Hermon. That is why the pact that prevented anyone from turning back. The rebellion was not a slip, it was a plan. And humanity paid the price. Consider what it means to live in that era. You are an ordinary human being trying to survive, to cultivate, to raise your children. Suddenly, immense beings dominate the land, not just by force, but by influence. The leaders learned to forge weapons. The powerful learned to manipulate. The ambitious learned to read the heavens to predict and control. All social balance was destroyed. The weak were crushed. The righteous were silenced. The cry rose up. The Book of Enoch describes that the spirits of the dead began to cry out, and their voices reached the gates of heaven. The archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, heard the cry and looked down. They saw the blood shed. They saw the corruption spread. They saw what the watchers had done, and they brought the accusation before God. The response was immediate. First, Uriel was sent to the son of Lamech, who was Noah, to warn him of what was to come. A flood, a complete destruction. The earth would be washed, but the seed of the righteous would be preserved. It was the first mention of the ark in the context of Enoch, confirming the narrative that would later appear in Genesis. Then Raphael received a specific mission to bind Azazel. The punishment described as brutal. Azazel was taken to a desert called Dudael. There Raphael opened a hole in the earth, cast Azazel into it, covered him with jagged and sharp stones, and sealed the opening. Darkness was imposed upon him, and there he would remain until the great day of judgment, when he would be cast into the eternal fire. There was no appeal, there was no forgiveness, it was absolute condemnation. Meanwhile, Gabriel received orders to destroy the children of fornication, the Nephilim. The text says they would be set against one another, so that they might destroy each other in battle. 500 years of war, half a millennium of giants tearing each other apart, until none remained. Michael was sent to bind Semjaza and the other leaders. They would be bound for 70 generations under the hills of the earth, until the day of judgment, when they would be led to the abyss of fire. Visualize this scene. 200 beings who were once glorious chained in the depths, awaiting a sentence that has not yet come, the entire army dismantled, the leaders imprisoned, the children destroyed, and over all this, the waters of the flood to wash away what remained. But the question that will not be silenced is, if the Nephilim were destroyed, if the Watchers were imprisoned, if the earth was purified, why does Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 say there were giants on the earth in those days and also after? Also after. This means that somehow something survived or resurfaced. Some scholars argue that the genetic lineage of the Nephilim may have crossed the flood through the wives of Noah's sons. Others suggest that there was a second incursion of fallen angels after the flood, generating new giants, which would explain peoples like the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the inhabitants of Bashan mentioned in the Old Testament. Goliath, the giant that David faced, measured 6 cubits and a span, approximately 2 meters and 90 centimeters. He had 4 brothers, all giants. The lineage persisted. Amidst all this, a truth emerges. The greatest spiritual battles are rarely visible. What Azazel and the Watchers represent is not just an ancient rebellion, it is a pattern that repeats. Influence disguised as knowledge, corruption packaged as progress. And if you want to understand how these forces still operate today, how the words of Christ on the cross responded to all this, the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem, will open your eyes. Point the cell phone camera at the code on the screen or access the link in the description. Each access also strengthens this channel. Go there. But what happened to the knowledge that Azazel brought? The answer is simple, it remained. The weapons were transmitted. The techniques of seduction were refined. Astrology spread through Babylon, Egypt, Greece, Rome. Vanity became an industry. War became an art. What the Watchers taught did not die with them. It took root in human civilization itself. It became culture. And here is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this narrative. The punishment of Azazel was also the attribution of eternal guilt. The book of Enoch, chapter 10, verse 8, declares, "To him attribute all sin." All sin, not just what he taught directly, but everything that derived from it. Every sword that killed, every vanity that destroyed, every manipulation that corrupted, the chain of consequences was bound to his name forever. That is why Azazel appears in Leviticus chapter 16 in the ritual of Yom Kippur. Once a year, the high priest of Israel took 2 goats. One was sacrificed to the Lord. The other was sent to the desert for Azazel, carrying symbolically the sins of the people, the scapegoat, the bearer of guilt, taken to the same desert where Azazel himself was chained. Coincidence? The rabbis debated for centuries. Some said that Azazel was just the name of a place. Others, like the commentator Nachmanides in the 13th century, stated clearly that Azazel was an entity, and that sending the goat to him was a way of returning the sins to their original source. It was recognition that the root of corruption had a name, and that name could not be erased. But there is another detail that few realize. Mount Hermon, where the Watchers descended, is in the region that the Greeks would later call Panias, dedicated to the god Pan. In the Roman period, the city built there was called Caesarea Philippi, and it was exactly there, in that place charged with dark spiritual history, that Jesus took his disciples and asked the most important question of all the Gospels, "Whom do ye say that I am?" Peter answered, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus declared, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." The gates of hell. Jesus was literally facing the cave that the pagans called the gate of Hades. and he chose that location, that exact geographical point, to declare his authority over the darkness. It was no accident. It was direct confrontation. It was as if Jesus was saying, "You descended here, you swore here, you spread corruption from here, but I am taking this territory back." Azazel's army was defeated even before the cross was raised. But the war did not end. The letter of Jude in the New Testament, verses 6 and 7, makes direct reference to the angels who kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. They are kept in everlasting chains, under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. It is the same story from Enoch, validated canonically. Peter repeats the theme in his second letter, chapter 2, verse 4. The angels that sinned were cast down to Tartarus, a Greek word that appears only once in the entire New Testament, specifically to describe this imprisonment. Even without including the Book of Enoch in the canon, the New Testament recognizes the events it describes. The story was too deeply embedded in Jewish tradition to be ignored. Jesus knew it. The apostles knew it. The first Christians knew it. So why was the book excluded? There is no simple answer. Part of the reason was the diversity of versions and the difficulty of establishing a reliable text. Part was the controversial nature of some passages, especially the detailed descriptions of angelic cosmology. Part was simply the political and theological process that defined the canon over centuries. But exclusion did not mean disappearance. The Book of Enoch survived complete in Ethiopia, translated into Ge'ez, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Fragments in Aramaic appeared in Qumran. The story refused to die, as if there was something in it too important to be erased. And perhaps this something is the central lesson of everything. Azazel's army was not made only of supernatural beings. It was made of ideas, of knowledge, of influences. The swords taught by Azazel are still forged. The vanity he spread is still cultivated. The manipulation he introduced is still practiced. The army was not destroyed. It only changed form. Consider how many times you were influenced by something that seemed like progress, but was a trap. How many times knowledge came before the maturity to use it. How many times the shortcut seemed like liberation, but was disguised imprisonment. This is the legacy of Azazel. It is not just an ancient story. It is a pattern that repeats in every generation, in every culture, in every human heart. The promise of knowledge without consequence, of power without responsibility, of desire without limit. The serpent in Eden used the same strategy. Ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Azazel only took this to another scale, and humanity continues to fall into the same trap in different versions, with different technologies, but with the same root. The good news is that the story does not end with Azazel. Just as there was a fall, there was redemption. Just as there was corruption, there was purification. Just as there was an army of darkness, there was one who came to destroy the works of the devil. The Book of Enoch, in the final chapters, describes visions of the Messiah, of the Son of Man, of the one who would come with authority to judge angels and men. Centuries before Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the text already pointed to him. The solution to the problem of the Watchers was not just imprisonment, it was substitution, a new Adam, a new humanity, a new covenant. On the cross of Calvary, Jesus was not only paying for the sins of men, he was undoing what the Watchers had done. He was declaring authority over principalities and powers. He was sealing the final defeat of every army that rose against the Creator. Colossians chapter 2 verse 15 says that Jesus spoiled principalities and powers. He made a shoe of them openly, triumphing over them in it. It was the final inversion. What began with angels descending in rebellion ended with God descending in sacrifice. What began with a pact of darkness ended with a covenant of blood. Azazel was chained. The Nephilim were destroyed. The flood washed the earth with water and silence, but what was taught remained. Think about it. The sword that a Roman soldier used to pierce the side of Christ descends from the same techniques that Azazel taught to men before the flood. The vanity that led empires to ruin carries the same seed planted in those ancient days. Knowledge survived because it took root in human nature itself. Perhaps that is why, centuries later, when John wrote about the final battle in Revelation, he did not describe only angels against demons. He described ideas against ideas, kingdoms against kingdoms. The same conflict that began on Mount Hermon has not yet ended. It only changed form, and each generation without knowing chooses which side it is on. Azazel's army still marches, not with visible swords but with invisible influences, not with giants of flesh but with ideas that grow disproportionately within the human mind. The battle is not against flesh and blood, as Paul wrote to the Ephesians. It is against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. The final question is not about Azazel. It is about you. What do you do with the knowledge you receive? How do you respond to the influence that surrounds you? Where is your loyalty when the shortcut seems more attractive than the path? Adam received a garden and chose the wrong tree. The Watchers received a mission and chose desire. Humanity received revelation and chose distortion. The pattern repeats. The door remains open, but there is a hand extended from the other side, and that hand carries nail marks. You have just dived into one of the deepest and least known stories that precedes the flood, the rebellion of the Watchers, the fall of Azazel, the forbidden knowledge that shaped humanity. But there is something even more powerful than all that, the final words of Jesus on the cross, which respond to all this corruption with absolute redemption. If you want to deepen your faith and discover what really happened in the final hours of Christ, I have prepared the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. It is a reading that will transform the way you understand the cross and its eternal significance. To access it now, take your cell phone, open the camera, and point it at the square code on the screen. When the link appears, just tap it. If you are on your cell phone, you can also access it through the description. Tap the title of the video or the word "more" that appears below. On the computer or television, the link is just below the video. Each person who accesses the book is also helping to keep this channel alive, producing more content like this. So access it now, comment Amen down below, and continue this journey of faith with me. The door has been opened, the choice is yours.